Welcome or good morning to all our friends in Scotland. Mulibanje Zatwose Malawi. Welcome to the Roundtable meeting with Fiona Ritchie this morning at the British High Commissioner to Malawi. My name is Natasha Dodo. I am the Communications and Engagement Officer here at the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. A gentle reminder to please keep yourself on mute during the session to avoid any background noise. And please note that this meeting is being recorded and we will share the meeting on our website. Please feel free to introduce yourselves and share any questions you have in the chat box. Without further ado, I will now hand over to our Vice Chair, Susan Dalgett.
Hi, good morning to everybody in Scotland and good afternoon to everybody in Malawi. We're 2 hours ahead. Well, you're 2 hours ahead of us. My name is Susan Dalgety. I am one of the vice chairs of the Scotland-Malawi Partnership, and I will be chairing, lightly, today's roundtable, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome Fiona Ritchie, who is the British, as most of you will know, is the British High Commissioner and based in Lilongwe, and she represents the UK government. We're going to hear from Fiona about her work in recent months and also future plans over the following few months. And then we'll open it up to questions. We've already had quite a few questions lodged, and I will be asking some people to ask their question directly to Fiona. Others I will just group together under one topic and to make sure we get as many areas covered as possible. And if you have not already lodged a question, but you do have one, please drop it in the chat and I will try and keep an eye on that. So without any further from me, I'll just very pleased to hand over to Fiona Ritchie. Fiona.
Thank you very much, Susan. Hi, everybody. Great to see those of you I've met before online or in person, and any new faces that I haven't met yet. We can always correct that. I thought what I'd do is set out a little bit about the new British government and ministerial priorities, and then talk a little bit about what's happening in Malawi, where we see the status of various different reforms, the economy, governance, etc., and then talk a little bit about current and future priorities for the UK and Malawi. And then, as Susan said, really happy to answer any questions afterwards. I won't try and speak for too long, because sometimes I think the best discussions are a bit more free-flowing and based on the things that you really want to hear about. All right, so let me kick off. You will all be very, very well aware that we have a new UK government following the general election in July. And it's a really big change, I think, compared to, we've had a lot of changes in government over recent years, but this is the first time that we've had a Labour government in more than a decade. And I think what we're seeing is a government that's struggling to really get to grips with the challenges that matter the most to British citizens, which are all about the economy, basically, and cost of living. People really care about the issues that affect them directly. But we do also have a new government that is pretty outward-looking and is very well aware of the importance of international engagement. So we're not seeing an entirely domestic focus, but what we are seeing is a strong push from the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister to see the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office really as the international delivery arm of the government's domestic agenda. So its top priorities are, for us as FCDO, are growth, and I will say a little bit more about growth as we go on, climate, nature and energy, security, so the security of British citizens, Europe, but then also international development and sort of resetting relations with the Global South, or with countries in the Global South. And as part of that, ministers are also working through a new approach to the African continent, because I think there's a real sense that we have not necessarily made the most of the challenges and opportunities of countries in Africa. So some of those priorities I'm not going to talk about because they're slightly less relevant for us who are interested in Malawi. So Europe and security, very important focuses, but not so much for us. The Foreign Secretary has commissioned 3 reviews, which have just concluded, and I think he's got the recommendations on his desk right now. So I can tell you what they're looking at, but I can't tell you what they're going to conclude because he's the only one who has seen that yet. And there's really one about global impact. So that's how we can get the most out of our global network and how we can make sure that our diplomatic missions are fit for purpose in a world that is increasingly polarized and where we're seeing sort of tensions and conflict and wars that we haven't seen for quite some time. And I think it's important for a new government to come in and take stock of some of that. There's also a real review around economic power and economic diplomacy. So making sure that the FCDO is able to answer the government's call to focus. Main effort is on economic growth. Now, of course, what that really means is UK economic growth, but it's also abundantly clear that growth globally is good for the UK. Our chief economist has been looking at some of the data and crunching numbers, and 1% growth globally is equivalent to 1.5% growth in the UK. So it really matters, and this is not something that we can do on our own. And what this translates to for developing countries is really, what does inclusive economic growth look like? So it's not, no one is expecting me to be able to articulate how Malawi is contributing to UK economic growth in the short to medium term. It's really about building trading partners, markets of the future, and understanding that part of our development priorities and development objectives are also about economic growth, but that we have to really focus hard on inclusion, because as we know, economic growth does not always trickle down to the poorest, and it's still a real priority for us to make sure that it does. And then the other review is our international development review. It's been more than 4 years since DFID and the former FCO were merged, and I think we've had some challenges and we've had some successes, and I think the Foreign Secretary really wants to take stock of what that looks like for the organisation that leads on international development for the UK, not just FCDO, but actually other government departments that spend UK ODA. And I think he wants to check that we've got our structures right, and also that we're modernising what international development means. I think we've seen trends come and go over the last 2 or 3 decades. And I think in line with a real desire to talk about partnerships in a different way, and I'll say a little bit more about that when I talk about Annalisa Dodd's recent visit, is to put partnerships on more of an equal footing, to make our development assistance less paternalistic, and to really walk the talk on development being something that we do in partnership with countries and not something that is done to countries. Of course, it's easy to say that and much harder to figure out what that actually means in practice. But I'm really hoping that in the new year, when we get the Foreign Secretary's views on all of these reviews, that we then start to work through implementation and really figuring out what that means. So I think I might stop there on UK government, and I'll come back to FCDO ministers in a bit. Malawi context. I keep dreaming of the day that I'm going to come to one of these roundtables and tell you that things are going really well, and that the enabling environment for inclusive economic growth in Malawi is improving, but I'm afraid it's not. And I don't think any of us are hugely surprised by that, but we're all in the business of being optimistic, so we have to keep pushing.
You could sit and listen to it if you wanted for 10 minutes to hear her speak now. No.
Oh. Did you mean to mute me?
I'm not quite sure what happened there, Fiona. Do you want to just keep going?
Yeah, I keep getting muted, so I just want to check that you can still hear me.
Yes, I can still hear you. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Okay, good. So moving on to the context, the economy. I think the last time we spoke, we had either just agreed or were about to be agreeing an IMF program for Malawi, which was important for a few reasons. One of them was, and this is the one that perhaps unfortunately the government has really focused on the most, is getting budget support in from development partners. So it did unlock budget support from the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and the EU. But actually, for the vast majority of diplomatic missions and development partners, the real benefit of the IMF program was the structural reforms that it would bring into the economy, the better public financial management, better fiscal management, monetary policy, and really getting a sense that the government was determined to address the underlying problems that make Malawi's economy so difficult. And it's perhaps not entirely surprising that that piece has not really come through in the way that we would have hoped. The programme is very much off track. And I think we are, I mean, I never say never, but I think unless something changes drastically in the next few months, it's unlikely that we'll be able to pass the first review of the programme in time to keep the programme on track. And the timing for that is not great, of course, with the elections coming up in September 2025. But I think that I know that sometimes World Bank and IMF programmes are a bit controversial, but they're not about reward and punishment. They're about the macroeconomic fundamentals of a country and its economy. And I think if that is not there, then it raises some really difficult questions for development partners. It means we're not getting the impact of our development programs that we want to see. So there's a lot still to be done there. I think it's fair to say that our reflection on the midterm review of the budget is that it is not really as much of an austerity budget as the Minister of Finance has said publicly. I think it's proven really difficult in an election year and when things are very difficult to cut civil service spend. So we've seen a pay rise for civil servants, which at a level of principle, no one could possibly be opposed to because civil servants are not paid enough, frankly. But the problem is the money's got to come from somewhere, and what we've seen is cuts to social sectors, including health, which is unfortunate. But we know that some of these tough decisions need to be made. But places where tough decisions are not being made are around things like increased fuel prices, increased energy tariffs and water tariffs. And I know those are really painful and politically very difficult for the government to take, but unfortunately, it's hard to see other ways of raising revenue. And we know that Malawi's debt stock is getting worse, and the government has resorted to increased borrowing rather than doing some of the tough reforms. Domestic debt is now 40% of GDP, and 70% of Malawi's debt service is external non-concessional debt. And the other big win for the IMF programme is intended to be the restructuring of Malawi's debt. And if that is not looking so possible, then that also raises questions about economic viability further down the line. So that's, yeah, I'm happy to answer more detailed questions about the economy if you have them. But I think suffice to say it's looking pretty bleak and it's hard to see where improvements are going to come from. I think some of you will have seen the Afrobarometer survey that was released recently, which shows that 2/3 of Malawians think that the country is going in the wrong direction, that corruption is increasing. And it also showed that people see the police service, followed by the Office of the President, as being the most corrupt in the system. And it also showed, very controversially, that were its poll to be extrapolated across the whole country, that you would see the DPP beating the MCP in the elections in September 2025. Now, I don't think we should read too much into that, but it's really interesting to see that there's such a well-respected piece of analysis out in the public domain showing that most Malawians don't think their country's going in the right direction. Then the other bit of background on elections preparedness is that electioneering it's been fairly intense for the last 6 months. It's only going to get more so over the coming year. And there's a lot of criticism of the Malawi Electoral Commission and the National Registration Bureau around ID cards and voter registration and making sure that all Malawians who are entitled to vote are able to exercise their democratic right. Some of that is probably fair criticism about processes. That Malawi is a very poor country. It's very difficult to roll out perfect systems. But some of it, of course, is politically motivated. And you can see that some of the political parties are laying the groundwork for a future challenge to the validity of the election results. So that's going to be kind of main effort, I think, for the UK Malawi over the coming year. And then finally, turning to UK priorities, you'll all be very well aware that Minister Annalisa Dodds was in Malawi last week for a couple of days. She visited both Malawi and Zambia, and we worked very closely with the High Commission in Zambia to make sure that we kind of presented a coherent and compelling narrative of both countries for her as she and the Foreign Secretary and other ministers are thinking through our longer term approach to development. And it's really at its heart, what does a respectful modern partnership look like in a country like Malawi, where needs are vast, But you have authorities that are not necessarily always doing the right things for their people. You have very high expectation that the British government is going to speak out on human rights issues, and that's very difficult to do in a way that doesn't look like you're telling another country what to do. And also we know that if we just increase volumes of aid, that is not going to be a transformation for Malawi. So much of it is about governance. It's about the bargain that the elites have amongst themselves. How do we change that? And how do we turn that bargain into something that delivers growth for Malawi? And fundamentally, that is not something that any external government or any external organization can do. It's an inside job. So what does our partnership look like in the future, being really recognizing those things? And I think that is something that we will be working through over the next year once we have the bigger picture sense from the Foreign Secretary and other ministers. The visit itself went really well, though. She also announced our ongoing support to the education sector. And that's one sector where I feel really strongly that we have the commitment to reform from the government that we really need. It's a genuine partnership. We're doing something that the Malawian government wants, that they're putting resources behind, that they can see how it does what they need it to do. And it's basically a revised maths curriculum for standards 1 to 2, and then going on to standards 3 and 4 in the next phase. And it's rolled out across the whole country. And it's really addressing, for me, one of those building blocks that will help Malawi grow in the future. Is very long term, but what we're trying to do basically is create a better educated workforce that can sort of meet the modern challenges that Malawi faces as a country. And then this morning, actually, I was at a launch of a centrally managed program on WASH. And this is also an area where we've got really good partnership. And it really strikes me that sometimes there's no point forcing in sectors where you don't have willingness from government, you don't have capacity, because then you're not making the kind of long-term transformational change that you need. So we will be thinking about how we adapt our program to be smart, to really focus on where we can drive inclusive growth, to think a bit about anti-corruption. What does that look like? And how do we get more Malawian voices in that space? Because I think continually delivering tough messages to government is not working. It doesn't work anywhere, we know that. So what might work is empowering Malawian organizations. And I know a lot of you are interested in how we support Malawian organizations, CSOs, and smaller organizations. I think it's fair to say that we have always and probably will continue to struggle to fund directly very small institutions for a lot of reasons, but including the sort of fiduciary risk management burden we place on them is so high, most of them can't do it. But we do really know that we need to do more with grassroots organizations. And I think we'll be focusing the most on advocacy rather than service delivery. So we have a new civil society component as part of our anti-corruption work. It's Malawian-led with an international sort of implementer. And it's got 3 different parts. There's grants for projects. And those projects can be in any sector, but they have to be about corruption or tackling corruption. There's also capacity building for those organizations that we work with. And then there's also a real sense of how we get those organizations to convene and organize themselves. So there'll be a working group on accountability that includes all of those organizations. We're basically in the market for trying new things and seeing what sticks, what might work, because we know that some of our large-scale service delivery programs have not necessarily delivered the sustainable results that we want to see. So we'll be working a lot with Minister Dodds as we sort of develop our portfolio over the coming years. I don't expect to see, we've just had our commission for the spending review. We know that resources will remain tight. We know that the government would like to go back to 0.7, but it's not likely to happen in this parliamentary year. Difficult choices and trade-offs will need to be made. I don't yet know what the future budget for Malawi will look like, but I know that that ministers are still committed to working in the poorest countries. So if I had a crystal ball, I would say that we should be able to maintain resources in the short term, and then the longer term, we'll see. I feel like I've talked for quite a while, so I'm going to stop there and back over to you, Susan, and see if people have got questions or anything they want to pick up from that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fiona. That was really, really helpful and really interesting. And I think what struck me was your introduction. It's the economy that matters both in the UK and in Malawi, but in Malawi probably to the extent that it is, life-changing for everybody, and the economic short-term future of the country, I have to say, from where I'm sitting, does not look very positive at all. So I think that's something all of us, whatever we do in with our partners and friends in Malawi, I think we need to be aware continually that we are working in a country that has a very, very fragile economy, and that people are still struggling just to eat once a day, Hey, right, so we've got lots of questions, and Fiona gave us lots more to think about. I'm particularly interested in the approach of FCDO in terms of partnership, which is something the Scotland-Malawi Partnership and the Malawi-Scotland Partnership at a much more local level have tried to do over the last 2 decades. So I might have a question specifically about that later, but I'm now going to invite, I have a list of questions here, and there is one on education, about Malawi, about Malawi degrees in universities, and what should Malawi universities do to be on par with the UK standard. Now, that's a very kind of specific, question for you, Fiona. It's coming from Ahab Kafan Sani. I'm absolutely useless with spreadsheets. So, Afid, are you around? Ahab, sorry. Ahab, are you around? Is Ahab there? No.
Yes, I'm around.
Oh,
Thanks,
Ahab,
Susan, I'm
would you
around.
like to ask your question much more eloquently than I was?
Yeah, basically, most of the investors in UK, they're not accepting Malawian diplomas and degrees. So there's that challenge. So the question was just to get more information what the High Commissioner can do in Malawi so that we can be at par, taking into account the international standards. Thank you.
Sure. Some of my closest contacts in Malawi are CEOs and people who are in senior positions in the private sector, and they've definitely said to me that they try to recruit Malawian nationals where they can, because most of them are really committed to Malawi's development. I think you don't run a business in Malawi without having some emotional attachment or some desire to do well for the country. I think if you're investing in Malawi from a purely profit basis, it's not a sensible destination for that. There has to be something more to it. But they are telling me that increasingly they are seeing fewer and fewer Malawians leaving university with the standard of education, skills and experience that they would expect. I have to be honest, it's not an area that the British High Commission is involved in or will be involved in. We're not experts in secondary education or tertiary education. We are looking at some scholarships but that's largely for girls who we want to continue on into secondary school. We engage relatively regularly with Malawian universities, but not at a sort of detailed level of standards. But I would say this is not somewhere that the British government needs to get involved. I think there's no reason why Scottish higher education institutions can't have direct links, and they do have direct links. So I would really encourage the relationships that we have, and many of you are affiliated to higher education institutions, get in touch. Encourage Malawian institutions to get in touch with their opposite numbers. I think this is one of those things where people-to-people links really matter and can make a huge difference. And there's nothing like hearing it from the horse's mouth about what standards are needed globally these days and how Malawi can aspire to those.
Mm. Yeah, we have a higher education forum, it's called Malawi Partnership, and this might be an issue that could be the subject of a future roundtable by the Higher Education Forum, because it is, as Fiona says, and as you, of course, will know yourself, that higher education standards across the globe, with a global economy, people are competing in a global way rather than individual countries. So it's very important that Malawi's universities and FE colleges are as good as they possibly can be. Fiona, touching on education, because I'm actually interested in girls in secondary school, but let's go back to the maths, because as someone who still struggles with maths at my age, I think we would like to hear a bit more about the programme for the curriculum, because if we can support children at that level, then that surely, as you say, it's a long-term project, but that will feed right through to higher education eventually.
Yeah, for sure. So it's the combination of really a lot of work and effort by my education team here in Malawi. And it's having the right expertise. And then I can't emphasize enough, having a Ministry of Education that wants to do this. You can't impose a solution on a country if you want to achieve national scale, which is what we're trying to achieve. So we did the first component of our programme, which is just coming to an end now, was to pilot a revised maths curriculum for standards 1 to 4. And it was based on the fact that sort of educational attainment is pretty appalling at primary level in Malawi, and the percentage of 10-year-olds who can count is, I mean, we're something around 85–90% of kids that leave school without being able to do basic maths, and that's just not sustainable. And I think the way maths was traditionally taught in Malawi was quite rote learning. So people were learning to repeat after their teacher, but they didn't understand the basic concepts. So then that's not something that you can translate into real life. So we piloted this new curriculum, which is involving teacher training, and it's got the workbooks for the teachers, and really importantly, workbooks for the kids, so that they have their own materials and that they can do self-study as well as learn in class. And it's interactive, so they do learning in groups as well as in the main classroom. And it's also designed so that teachers can use whatever materials they can find locally, like bottle tops, sticks, leaves, whatever, to teach counting, and a way where kids can actually hold things and then understand for themselves concepts of addition and subtraction. And I've seen a few classroom demonstrations in action now, and it's going to take a long time, but it really seems to work. The pilot, which we rolled out, and I can't remember how many districts it was in, but it showed that on the new syllabus, a 1 year of learning was equal to 1.5 years of learning under the previous syllabus. So it's a huge return on that investment. And it's not a hugely cheap thing to do, but it's, I mean, compared to the cost of educating kids in the UK, it's enormously cheap, but it's such an important investment. So it was now, after the pilot, we learned a few lessons, including really simple things like plastic covers for those workbooks, which meant that they lasted longer. And then also to include materials for special educational needs. And there's quite a lot of special educational needs in Malawi, and often they're taught in the same class as everyone else. So we needed to make it possible for teachers to manage that. And it was rolled out across every state primary school in the country in September this year. So hopefully we'll have some data at the end of this year as to what's working and what's not working, and we can tweak it as we go. But yeah, really pleased that the minister signed off our business case for the next phase of support, which will embed it more. We are realistic and not expecting the government to take on this funding themselves in the medium term. So we're also trying to crowd in other forms of finance. And we've also recognised that that one big gap is keeping girls in school, which is why there's a new, not yet designed, a scholarship component to try and get some of the brightest girls who've got places in secondary school to encourage them to go. And then finally, there's a school feeding component. One of the things I didn't talk about much in my introduction was the increasing impacts of climate change on our programming in Malawi. When I came here 4 years ago, I was full of talk about how we were going to stop doing humanitarian response. It was going to be all about resilience. And then reality was a bucket of cold water. And actually we do still have to do humanitarian response. That's just how life is. And we just really recognize that people are like, climate change is meaning that people are coming to school hungry and they're not learning. So it feels like a backward step in many ways. It's not a modern approach to how we do education programming, but it's what's necessary in Malawi. So we're going to try it and see if that has another impact.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think all of us who have any connection with Malawi need to understand exactly what life is like on the ground and be very much aware of that solutions that work in, the centre of Edinburgh do not necessarily work in Mzuzu. So yeah. We need to, or in villages, we need to be really aware of that. We have a question just about the WASH, from Keita, asking if you could share a bit more about the centrally organised WASH projects.
I mean, the honest answer is no, because what I can tell you is that it is a multi-country program. I think it's about £18 million, and it covers Bangladesh, Nepal, Malawi, Tanzania, and I think Sierra Leone and Nigeria. But don't quote me on that. I think that's right. And we're combining efforts in Tanzania and Malawi. It's the same group that's running that.
Yes.
And the purpose of it is really to move beyond just doing kit. So it's not about infrastructure. It's not about providing boreholes and pumps. It's about working within communities to make it sustainable. So it's about community ownership of maintenance and repairs. It's about teaching about the importance of water sanitation in schools. And it's about getting the data that we need. So sort of digitizing some of these services so that people can, what communities are receiving, how often it needs repaired, how much it's costing them, to really, it helps sort of, it's a bit glue in the social contract, using the WASH sector as a way to do that. And it kind of fits with the government's kind of approach to partnerships, which is very much, let's take the next step in this sector. We've done a lot already, we've learned a lot, and we know that the hard stuff is the system stuff, but that's where we really need to focus now.
Yes, that's Kate. Was that helpful?
Yeah, we do work with some it's the German organisation who do a lot of this work. And what, is there any possibility of funding for materials, teaching and learning materials for schools and girls and after school clubs, which was translated into Chichewa? Because there are some wonderful resources which at present it needs a sort of a combined demand, not just one or two small projects. So if the resources were in Chichewa, is that something that there is any support for?
I mean, not from the British High Commission itself. We don't have spare budget for that kind of thing. But it sounds like, the one thing I took away from the launch this morning was that it's not funding in stovepipes. It's about how we get all the different collective efforts together. So it sounds as if that is an area that could be useful. But I have to be honest, I don't know where specific funding for that would come from.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm going to move on to Eddie Duncan, who's actually a trustee of the Scotland-Malawi Partnership, but he also works on road traffic fatalities and injuries in Malawi, which having just come back from Malawi, I think the motorbike accident rate now is something like 2 fatalities a day. I mean, it's just so. Eddie, do you have something you would like to ask Fiona?
Thanks, Susan. Fiona, lovely to see you again. And Susan, you're absolutely right about the issues to do with motorbikes. It's very well known about it, and I know that Fiona is very well aware of this as well. Really, just to ask you, Fiona, I know that the High Commission have been working hard in this area, and if you've got any future plans to continue developing that support, perhaps particularly looking at the focus of coordinating services. It's such a major impact on people's lives, a huge economic impact, over 10% of GDP. So fits very much with the government priority of looking at the fiscal area as much as the humanitarian area as well. But unlike very big problems like malaria, which have a relatively simple solution in providing an anti-malarial medications, the challenges of road traffic trauma is much more multifactorial and requires coordination across many, many different services. So interested to hear more about that from you.
Sure. Thanks so much. Yeah, and as you know, this is something that we are taking pretty seriously. And I spoke at an event about motorcycle taxi safety or lack thereof, because I think part of our job as the British High Commission is to talk about it. So there's something there around using our platform to raise these issues and to make the point that this is costing the Malawian Health Service huge amounts of money. So it's not just lost GDP from lost earnings, it's also the strain on the health service. But you're right, this is not actually something that we are necessarily tackling through our bilateral health programming in Malawi, although some of our centrally managed programs do have an impact. And also we have relationships with various different academic institutions. You know, we've got people-to-people links on relevant surgery. So, you know, the Lion facility in Malawi and the British Association of Hand Surgeons are involved there. And I think, you know, there's a great deal that can be done that way. But the point that you made about it being multidisciplinary is really where the rubber hits the road. And actually, we are seeing this as a governance issue rather than a health issue. So one of our governance programs is an issues-based program called Traction, and it looks at multi-sector problems and tries to think about what solutions might be. And not so much road safety writ large, but the Kabaza safety is an issue that program has taken up, because there's so many vested interests in that space and making progress is quite challenging. But we think that with a multi-stakeholder approach, we can at least make some small improvements. It's not something we're going to be able to change overnight, but I think by trying lots of different approaches, and maybe I think personally taking it out of seeing it as a health issue and seeing it as a broader governance issue, economic issue, how things get done, I think that will be the best way of making a small contribution. But yeah, it's something that we've got in our sights very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Indeed, it's got massive education impacts as well. Looking at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eddie. Hey, Isaac, are you there? Isaac Chavula, who works in the area of climate resilient farming.
I am here.
Yeah, Isaac, do you want to say a little bit about TNA, and do you have a specific question for Fiona?
Surely, I would be very happy, and I'm humbled to contribute to this. I am the country director of TN organization, and the TN promotes the deep bed farming, which the government approved in 2021 as a very good alternative to ridging. You know, Malawi is languishing because of ridging a way of farming, which promotes a lot of erosion. And we all know the destructive nature of erosion as it floods the dambos and takes away the rich soils. We also know that Malawi depends on agriculture, but we are losing a lot of soils. A lot of effort by farmers to replenish these soils is drained. So the deep bed farming controls erosion because it harvests more than 90% of the rainwater that is received. Now, by harvesting water, the water is infiltrated in the soil and made available to crops, and that is increasing resilience of these crops that farmers grow. And against the climate change effects, you know, resilience of crops or fields that produce food for farmers means that the farmers become resilient against these climate change impacts. So we at TN developed materials. The intention is that we need to introduce some training material to schools, maybe starting from kindergarten, secondary, and primary and secondary, even tertiary. At tertiary level, we have already started working with the University of Livingstone. So the thing is, we need to train these farmers to be from young ages, so that as they grow, they know how to manage their soils and water resources better. So that as they come out of schools and become farmers themselves, they must know exactly how to manage these resources, which are so important to the economy of Malawi.
Thank you, Isaac. That's really interesting. Thank you. The Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Education might be, the people, I think, to embed that into the curriculum. But Fiona, do you maybe want to touch on that briefly, and then expand out into the work, the British High Commission's role in the climate crisis and the environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we don't have a bilateral agriculture program in Malawi. There's a lot of investments that are made that are relevant, but we focus largely on policy engagement with the Ministry of Agriculture. And I do talk relatively regularly to the minister, and his priorities are ones that we wholeheartedly support. So there's reforming the agricultural inputs programme, which is fertiliser subsidy. He is very keen on trying to move people away from sort of chemical fertilisers that have to be purchased at great cost, often from outside Malawi. And we all know what, for example, the war in Ukraine has done for the cost of fertilisers. But so he's really interested in moving into different forms of fertiliser, like composting, biogas, etc. That's something that's really hard to do at scale, but there's quite a lot of good examples of small scale social enterprise programs that are doing quite a lot of that. He also, I think, probably would put utmost priority on irrigation. And I think anyone who is Malawian or who has spent any time in Malawi is really struck by the fact that you've got this one growing season because we're dependent on rain-fed agriculture. And Malawi is it has to industrialize, and it has to move away from that. So that does require some sort of upfront investment. That scale of investment is beyond the resources of most bilateral development partners, maybe apart from the US, but certainly it's beyond our reach. But the World Bank and others are really investing in water infrastructure and thinking about moving into irrigation, like large-scale irrigation. So that will really help the ministry achieve its goals. And then the other piece is really around commercial agriculture. So there's a new mega farms unit, which, despite asking many times, I still don't fully understand what it does, but it's really about trying to support as much as possible those really large-scale commercial farms, or those with the potential to be large-scale commercial farms who can really export and help drive up Malawi's economic growth. Now, of course, Malawi is a country whose economy is largely agricultural, and those are the right things for the government to focus on. But we also need to make sure that that the smallholders, your average Malawian who has a small patch of maize to feed them and their families, that they're also supported. So we do have programming in resilience, which is around, trying to help poor households to withstand weather and climate related shocks, and also improving forest governance so that their land is more valuable and more resilient to those shocks, and then also trying to encourage. A big part of Malawi's problem is illegal charcoal and the illegal charcoal trade. So that's not just people chopping down firewood for their own domestic use, but that does happen. It's the fact that charcoal is a cartel in Malawi, and a lot of people are employed to create charcoal, and that is causing huge environmental degradation that we are trying to, through some of our programming, we're trying to address. But then we also recognise that that our support in the social protection is going to have to remain stable or perhaps increase, because the needs are high. And we're going into lean season with higher numbers of people who don't have enough to eat. We announced I think £3 million in May in response to the president's El Nino appeal, and we gave that money to the World Food Programme so that they could buy maize. And what we wanted to do was try and crowd in other development partner funding, because at that time the price of maize was relatively low, and we wanted to buy it while we could. And that is, we could have. It's a PhD to write about the political economy of maize in Malawi, but the market is so difficult. You have to really think about when to buy. And then a couple of weeks ago, we also gave WFP another 2.5 million to pre-position ahead of cyclone season. And I'm really glad we did, because it meant that we were able to get some money out the door before Cyclone Chido, which graced us with its presence over the weekend. It was really not as bad as we thought, but some people's lives have been lost, and definitely some housing and farmland has been damaged. But it did mean that we were in a good position to respond quickly. More is needed, but I think, we are going to be in the business of humanitarian preparedness and response for a while. One of the things that we are testing, and again, I don't quite know yet the appetite of our new government for cash transfers, but it's something that we passionately believe in, that where you can do cash transfers rather than food handouts, it's better. It's better for local markets, it's better for households. So that is also something that we're planning to continue doing. So watch this space on that, basically.
Okay, thanks very much, Fiona. Mick James has an interesting question about, and I like the way he has presented it, on remittance-led oath to support the Malawi economy, i.e. smart young people leaving the country to work abroad, so and sending money back. So Mick and Kate, would you like to? You're muted. Mick, you're muted. Yep.
Something's wrong.
Yeah. I've tried to message him. Can we?
So something about I can say a little bit about that.
Yeah. Thanks, Fiona.
Expertise at all, and I think at a sort of at a concept level, I think remittances are really important. The vast majority of them come from South Africa, from Malawi, and I think you need to balance the desire for Malawians to have a better life and leave the country, and they should be entitled to do that along with everyone else. But also, I worry about what that means for brain drain back in Malawi. But you might be aware that the government has a labor agreement with Israel, which is pretty controversial. But you can see where it's come from. It's basically a desperate government that had promised 1 million jobs at the start of its tenure, and a desperate need for foreign exchange. And then also some Malawians who are not finding jobs in Malawi, and they're desperate also, and they need to go overseas and support themselves and their families and get the experience that they want. I don't know so much about the nuts and bolts of this agreement, but I think it allegedly achieves that objective, and I think Malawi is really keen to try and do more of those government-to-government agreements. So let's see. They're not easy to organise, they're not easy to do, and I don't think we will be looking. I don't think one with the UK is likely anytime soon, but certainly it's definitely a big part of the picture for Malawi, and I think it's got pros and cons, to be honest.
Thanks. Mick, do you want to come back quickly on that? We didn't hear your question. We're still not hearing you. Sorry. Thanks, Fiona. I'm looking down my list here. There was yes, Delitso Muronia. Is Delitso here? His question, if he's not here, his question was kind of touching on what the wider policy objective of the UK government about partnership, but he was drilling down into the role of local NGOs beyond the government to government, and how they can work in areas such as climate change, youth empowerment. And I just wondered, Fiona, if you wanted to talk a little bit about your experience of kind of beyond the government to government, the actual how smaller organisations, the impact that they can make on the huge, and I don't think we can ever underestimate how deep and wide the challenges facing Malawi are.
Like, I think I've worked for FCDO, before FCDO, DFID for 23 years, and I've seen fashions, if we want to call it that, come and go in terms of civil society engagement, civic society engagement. Let's be broader about it, because it is civic society that we're talking about. And I think there's no right answer to all of this, because there's a cost to every way of doing business. But it's really, really obvious to me, sitting in Malawi, that change is an inside job. And so therefore, change needs to come from Malawians themselves. You can't impose it from the outside. And that is anyway not what a partnership is all about. It's not for us as a British government to be telling Malawians, the Malawian government, how to run their country, because it is for them. What we can do is stand up for human rights and democracy, because those are values that the UK cares about, and then look for those organisations that share those values and are trying to drive their country in that positive direction. Now, you have to do that really sensitively and really carefully, because that if you're on the other side of that and that's not what you want, then it looks like someone else meddling in your business. But I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with providing support, whether that's moral support or actual support to local grassroots NGOs, civil society organizations, parliamentarians, the media, people who are trying to create change for the better, then that for me has got to be a much more sustainable way of long-term development in Malawi. So that's partly why we're trying to do a little bit more with some of those organizations. It's not straightforward. I know that, you know, we don't have enough people or resources ourselves to manage lots and lots of tiny grants. And I think, as I said in my opening remarks, the burden that we place on organizations is very high because we're spending UK taxpayers' money, and quite rightly, the fiduciary risk management is very robust. So we don't want to, we recognize that sometimes we break small organizations with our demands, and especially if we're not the only development partner who's doing it. So you need to think creatively about how to work through those things. I also think, and I mean, this is for ministers to tell us whether we're doing it right or not, that we will probably not be looking at small Malawian NGOs to do service delivery, but advocacy, policy, communications, those are the kinds of things that we definitely do want to support. And that's why I talked a little bit about our new civil society strand in our anti-corruption programming, because for various reasons, it doesn't really work if the British government stands up and wags its finger and says, please stop being so corrupt, Malawian authorities. You need Malawian citizens to start holding their government to account. And I personally really believe that working through others is the best way to achieve that. So again, let's see what happens. This is something that I would like to do more of in the coming years.
Yeah, thank you. That's very, I think that phrase, change is an inside job, is extremely important, and we should all keep it to the front of our mind when we are developing and taking forward any partnerships that we have at whatever level, whether it's at the village level or whether it is government to government. I'm looking at the time. There is a question from Martina, which is looking at working with big farms. Now, she is not mega farms on economically viable trials for agroecology. Now, she's not looking for funding. She's actually asking about the possibility of the High Commission to facilitate meetings. So, Tina, would you like to ask Fiona a bit more about that?
Sure. Hello. Good afternoon. Can't see myself, but I hope you can.
Yeah, we can.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, there we go. Yes. Good afternoon. Yeah, it's basically we are working on lots of different field trials for a couple of years here at Ecology on testing viable alternatives to the chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and so on. And we are so far working mainly with smallholder farmers, but we have been working on a concept for like an ABC model kind of thing, where we would use the young graduates from the Malawian universities coupled with university graduates from other countries to work out little kind of hubs around places where mega farms are situated that could kind of set up a private agriculture extension service kind of thing, where they would be advising with us together the mega farms on a trial proportion or a small proportion of their land if they're ready to then use specific, compost extracts and other viable options to revive the soil fertility with microbiology. We are licensed in soil microbiology analysis and improvement, whereby there is worldwide evidence that you can change basically really the production in terms of quality, quantity, plant health and resilience within 1 or 2 growing seasons dramatically. So it would be great to have a chance and to kind of like, just also the basic support to work with these mega farmers pretty quickly. So maybe they could find out in time that they could actually save themselves a lot of money to put all those expensive inputs in that also need to be imported. And instead of that, like use these methods that also make them proud Malawian green farmers that actually prevent their communities to go down, which might be good on their self-esteem as well. So if we could get them all together in a room, and then there's a couple of interesting partners in the permaculture network in Malawi and within the agroecology We were hosting the National Agroecology Conference here at Ecology this
Thanks,
year.
Martina. Sorry
So
to
that
cut
would
you
be
off there, but
Sure,
I'm very
yeah.
much aware of Fiona's time. So Fiona, do you want to
Sure.
about everybody in the same room?
Yeah, so like a lot of the megafarm concept, which we've been working with some large scale farms for a while now, and the smallholder outreach is a big part of that. So for example, the macadamia farm that also grows chilies, and then using scale gets farmers to give them their chilies, and then they export it at bulk to get a better price. And then there's a couple of other, it sounds odd, but there's a essential oil farm which is run by a British woman, Tanya.
Tanya.
Yeah. So the same model works there. So it's something that we genuinely really believe in. But yeah, let's see if we can link you up with people. I know also. So we do less with smallholders ourselves directly, but IFAD, which is a UN organization, they have a mandate to work with smallholder farmers and in the rural areas. So there's definitely others in this sector who might be more useful to you than us, but happy to take that offline and see if we can link you up with anyone.
Thanks very much, Fiona. So we're almost out of time. Fiona, I know this is a very difficult question.
Say the best.
We're looking to 2025 when there will be elections, of course, in September. So the next 9 months will be very political in Malawi. But two things, what are you optimistic about and what are you most pessimistic about?
I am optimistic about the fact that Malawians are making some noise. And I think one of the things that I've been really surprised by is the way that the resilience of ordinary Malawians is such a strength, but it's also, I think, problematic sometimes, that people just take what is thrown at them. Yes. because they have to, and because if you're worried about what you're going to eat, you don't have the energy or the time to take political agency. But I have definitely seen an increase in people speaking out and Malawians speaking out, and a little less from development partners complaining about things from their comfortable position of coming from a democracy that works, etc. So I think that's really great. And I've noticed also a trend of seeing stories that maybe 2 years ago would have appeared one day in the news and then never been heard again. People are coming back around and not letting them disappear. So I think there's a real sense of a growing number of people who are feeling fed up with the deal that they've got right now and who are willing to say something about it and willing to do something about it. I think where I feel most negative is that I still feel that all the political parties are largely focused on themselves and how they can either keep hold of or get power, and it's not really for the benefit of the ordinary Malawians. So, for example, I don't see much scope for real public service delivery improvements or reforms in the next year because the government is focused on an election. And I think sometimes the opposition parties are a little bit more focused on how they can either win the election or have the election declared null and void. And so they're sort of prepping the ground for that. So people are just focusing on those things and ignoring what's really important, which is that Malawians don't have enough to eat. Yeah. So yeah, it's a mixed bag.
Mixed bag, a bit like the UK.
Yes.
Well, can I just say thank you very much for your time and for your expertise and your insight and your clear love of Malawi, and it's been an absolute delight. I hope you and your team have a wonderful festive season, and that 2025 is more optimistic than pessimistic. Yeah, and can I just say thank you to everybody who took part today. I wasn't able to get everybody's question in, but I am sure there will be other opportunities. And there's issues from this meeting that hopefully MaSP or Scotland-Malawi Partnership or both of us can take forward with the High Commission and with others in the future. So can I just wish everybody a very, very Merry Christmas and a very happy and hopefully democratic and 2025. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Susan. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Tia Nana.